All right, so we are here. I'm real excited to see you all. You all are, wait, let's see, how am I doing this? All right, there we go, a little bit better. You all are actually live in my bedroom. This is amazing. I'm super happy to see you all here. Thank you for joining me. Just a couple of housekeeping things to mention right up front. In case you don't know who I am and why you are watching this live right now, I'm Christopher Sebastian, and I am going to be doing a presentation on the veganism of Dumbo. In case you're wondering why I'm doing that, it's because my background is in media theory, and I like to integrate media theory into my my vegan work, my vegan writing, and help people to understand the influence of media on like the choices that we make, whether they are food choices, our relationships with other animals, or all of these other wonderful things. Um, and like just again, another housekeeping thing that I want to mention is that if you do hear a dog, a companion animal in the background, it's because my dog gets super aggy when I am talking to absolutely no one in particular, or so he thinks, because he doesn't understand how like phones or videos or computer screens work. And so he may or may not start getting like a kind of vocal during this stream, and I'll have to pick him up. So it's going to be a special treat for everyone involved, including me. Um, Also, one more last housekeeping thing before we begin. Actually, two more housekeeping things. Number one, I want to mention that Miyoko's Creamery is a very generous sponsor of the stream for Uplands Peak, and Miyoko will be actually offering $100 like matching donations for the first $100 that come through, including the folks that are like joining us from my Patreon. So if you actually are joining from my Patreon, welcome. This is what is replacing our monthly meetup, and we're totally looking forward to like just having some fun. But the very last housekeeping thing that I want to mention is I do not have a presentation for you. Like the physical presentation, the actual PowerPoint isn't really cooperating with us right now. So unfortunately, you're going to be looking at my face the entire time, which totally makes me feel completely comfortable. I'm absolutely fine with that. Usually, I turn my camera off when I'm doing a presentation so that all of us, yourself and me, are concentrating on the screen and what's actually being presented. That's not going to happen this time. So this New Year's Eve, you're just going to be looking at me the entire time, and we are all okay with that. It's unfortunate though, because the presentation that I prepared is really awesome. I love actually having visuals and like being able to like get people connected to the content that we're talking about, because obviously if we're analyzing a film, then it is a very visual medium. Um, this is going to be a bit of a condensed presentation because like originally when we had done the test run yesterday, when the visuals actually worked, we realized that we couldn't actually share computer audio and video at the same time. So I had to cut what was effectively a 35-minute presentation down to about 25 minutes. And if you're not even going to be able to see what I'm looking at, then this may actually be around 20 minutes. So let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. It's just going to be me talking to you the entire time. And yeah, like let's jump right on in. I am going to be looking off camera a couple of times because I'm still looking at the presentation, and that gives me prompts for what we're going to be talking about. So yeah, like in jumping right on in, like, you know, you probably remember Dumbo as like this 1941 Disney classic movie. Most of us saw it as kids. Most of us really enjoyed it as kids. It was great fun and a little traumatic from what you may recall or what you may have blocked. I definitely blocked a lot of this movie out until I watched it again for the purposes of sharing it with you all. But like, yeah, I definitely wanted to focus on certain aspects of the film because, like, the big question, like, you know, that I usually have when I'm talking about these films with other people is like, would I like share this film with my children? Would I let my children watch this film if I had kids, which I don't? But I do have nieces and nephews. I do have like lots of kids in my family. Do I want to share with them the kind of movies that, like, you know, were popular during the 1940s? And that's a very real question. Like, as a vegan, your answer is probably automatically going to be like, probably not. Like, I probably would not want to share like this kind of content with like the kids that are in my family because like, you know, like it's not exactly the most vegan thing out there, is it? Like you're talking about animal exploitation in the form of circus animals, in the form of animal enslavement for like human entertainment. That's not cool. That's not very vegan. That's not something that I want to do. Um, but like, you know, that's our answer because most of us already are vegan. And so we already don't want to participate in animal exploitation, or we want to minimize that as best we can. But if we're having conversations with other people who aren't vegan, like I think that there are a couple of instances in Dumbo that like connect with people on a like, you know, on a deeper level if they're not invested in like, you know, in rejecting or minimizing animal exploitation. So we're going to focus on a couple of key aspects of the film that like drive home different messages and really look at it as a snapshot in time, which I think is really fascinating to do. 1941, like, you know, like United States, America, like, you know, it's not the greatest time in history. You've got the Second World War that was just going on. You've got all kinds of like racial antagonism. You've got a lot of international strife and a lot of like, you know, a lot of like national strife that's happening. So like this is a fascinating, if not like somewhat like conflicting period of history to talk about. And I think that this film captures a lot of that. So like, yeah, like getting into the film, like a little bit of backstory, like let's start there. This is a film that is about anthropocentric animals. When you are talking about anthropocentric animals in media studies, you generally are talking about like, you know, like there are several different like categories of anthropocentric animals. Disney usually traffics in one or two types of anthropocentric animals in their talking animal films. So you've either got the talking animal films where the animals themselves are the center of the action, or the animals act as some sort of sidekick to the main character who is human. Especially if they are like a human female. You've got the heroine, the princess, if you will, like Snow White or Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty, where the animals are all kind of helping the main character. So like the first type is the civilized animal. That's what we're talking about, where these are the animals that show human mannerisms, but they still actually like, you know, fit into their normal designated role as a species, or like they still interact with one another as their normal species. So this an example of the civilized animal that like, you know, I actually have in the presentation is 101 Dalmatians. I've got an image of Pero and Perdita like on the screen, and like, you know, they are dogs, but they act in a civilized way, but they're still very clearly dogs who are companion animals to like, you know, to their human counterparts. They speak to one another in English. They speak to one another in a civilized manner. These are the civilized animals. An example of the other type of talking animal film that like Disney traffics in, it's the funny animal, where these are the animals who have human mannerisms, making them practically human, aside from being an animal. And that is like, you know, those are like the rescuers, or things like, you know, things like the animals that would be featured in like princess films like Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty, where these animals are wearing clothes. They are like interacting like, you know, in ways that are distinctly very, very human. But like, you know, but the only difference is that they are animals. So like, you know, these are the types of films that like that Disney has going on. Another variation of the talking animal, or the anthropomorphic or anthropomorphized animal, is the speech impaired animal. These are animals who hold conversations with humans or human members of the cast, but with a sort of studied dialect or a semi-intelligible, like, you know, like human-like tongue. And while this isn't a Disney example, the one that comes to mind is Scooby-Doo. You clearly understand Scooby-Doo. You clearly understand what he is, and like, you know, what he is trying to say to you, but he does it in this like exaggerated non-human way, and like the animal aspect of their identity is treated as something of a disability. So you hear Scooby-Doo saying "ruh-roh, Raggy," "uh-oh, Shaggy," or like, you know, like going bananas over Scooby stacks. And so like, yeah, so you'd have these variations on a theme. Oh, here he comes right now. This is my dog. I don't know if y'all can see him. He's like, dude, come here, come here. I know, get close, get close. Ah, yeah. He hears me talking, and so he's like, what the hell is going on? So he enters the room. This is Kid B, by the way. He is 10 years old. He'll be 11 in March. So far as we can guess, because we just kind of adopted him as a senior dog. He was walking around on the street. And yeah, like I said, I try to keep him out, but he just like kicks open the door. all 6 pounds of him, and he hears me talking in here, and he's like, "Who are you talking to? It's just us. What's this about? What are you doing? What's going on? You're not having a conversation with me." So he just threw me off my game. But yeah, anthropomorphic animals. Um, in Dumbo, we're actually talking about like the civilized animals because they communicate with each other in English. All of the animals, except, as a matter of fact, Dumbo, ironically enough, everyone is speaking in English. So this is the type of film that we are talking about. A little bit of backstory about Dumbo. It actually started its life as a book, like most of Disney movies. Dumbo the Flying Elephant was actually a roller book by Helen Aberson and Harold Pearl. It was 36 pages long. I have an image of a roller book here, but definitely like look it up if you want to figure out what it looks like because it is a really awesomely weird old-timey contraption. Like it is literally like the pages like scroll by as you like you can advance or like go back as you want to because the whole book is like actually on a scroll. I definitely want you to see this image. Like it's fascinating. It's like a precursor to the modern day Kindle, only like it's operated on like wishes and love and glitter and like I don't know, like squirrels in a wheel or something. But like it is not, it's definitely something that you want to see. But yeah, like as a 36-page roller book, it's like kind of thin source material. So the actual Dumbo film is only 64 minutes long. So yeah, like you don't actually get a lot of, they really strung this story out as best they could, adding lots of musical numbers and a surprising and disappointing number of like racial tropes and anti-labor tropes as well. But like speaking of like the animal exploitation, jumping right into that, like, the most troubling and the most overt aspect of this is that, like, Disney represents these animals as, like, actually loving or being otherwise content with their captivity. That is definitely, like, it's ahistorical, it's incorrect, and, like, it absolutely bears no, like, no aspect of reality. Like the image that I actually like included in the presentation is the variations of circus animals. All of them are literally in cages. Like they're all in actual cages. So like, but they're happy about it. They're happy about it. Which like, is like one of the great ironies is that like when you like look at like the origins of like circus animals or how many circus animals actually got to be circus animals, like they weren't all just bred in captivity. Many circus animals were actually captured in the wild. So these were animals that were taken from their natural habitat, actually imprisoned and and forced to like perform, literally perform, for the benefit of human entertainment. So like, these are actually like exhibits, which actually shares a lot of colonial roots. And there are like several books written about this. Like, like I included a bibliography at the end of this presentation so that you could like, you can learn more about it yourselves. But the presentation of like animals like as objects, these objectified animals, like for human entertainment, is the most obvious and overt way that like we interact with the story of Dumbo. And so like you have like the origin of Dumbo being that like you've got the stork who is delivering these animals in the sky to their respective families, which is like like it feels heartwarming because of course like you're not having a conversation with children about the birds and the bees and like how like families are actually formed. Like these animals are just kind of like dropped out of the sky. And so there's no mention of how families interact with one another or why they exist the way that they do. And of course, it is a misrepresentation of the way that like animal families exist in the wild anyway. Like captive animals don't behave the way that like wild animals do. Why? Because no one behaves the way that they do in captivity that they do when they're living their natural life. If you actually put me in like a 2x4 like cage, like or like a 6x6 box, or any type of prison cell, the way that I like act or interact with the world is going to be dramatically different from the way that like I act if I'm allowed to go about my daily life, walking around, going to Starbucks, or like any of those things that I remember doing before there was a pandemic that stopped me from doing them. But you know what? That's neither here nor there. That's like, that's an aside. We will talk about that another time. Um, But like one of the like aspects that like I thought was very interesting to talk about is like the way that like Walt Disney had integrated real life events into what was happening in the film on the screen. This was, I believe, the fifth like Disney full length feature film, animated feature film, and when Dumbo was being filmed, there was actually an animator strike at that time. There were unions that were forming all over Hollywood, and like the animators were no exception. So Disney animators, like wanting to have better working conditions and like more money, they tried to do the same thing, at Disney properties, and Walt Disney said, absolutely not. We're not having any parts of that. And as such, like when people went on strike, Walt Disney actually had animators come in from other studios to fill in for them. And to drive the point home that like Walt Disney was like anti-labor and anti-worker rights, like he actually included an aspect of the strike in the finished product. He actually had them animate clowns that were that wanted to go on strike against the big boss. And he like had mocked them in a buffoonish and antagonizing way, presenting people who wanted better working conditions as like greedy people, and depicting them specifically and explicitly as clowns was that was somewhat intentional. So yeah, like he included that scene, and I actually have in the presentation here variations on a theme, because the clowns are some of the worst and most despicable aspect of the film, or characters in the film. They were like guilty of some of the worst abuses against animals, and they were the ones that were when they set up more elaborate and more dangerous like tricks for Dumbo and like the circus animals to participate in, for the pleasure of the audience. And even like one of the clowns had gone so far as to say like elephants ain't got feelings. They're made of rubber. And so like you have this like exaggerated trope of the clowns looking for like worker rights or wanting worker rights, and and depicting these people as the type of people who abuse animals, which is another media trope that we had gone over in previous presentations that I had done, talking about the trope of bad people hurt animals. And so making the clowns like particularly guilty of the worst or most egregious abuses against animals in the film, and making exaggerated statements actually does it has the psychological effect of making us as individuals look at like the clowns as bad people, and to a lesser extent or on a subconscious level making people who want worker rights bad people. So that is one of the effects of this, and one of the things that we see actually depicted on film. So you see the sort of like propaganda that is operating in the background of Dumbo, of of reinforcing the idea that animals who live in captivity are actually living comfortable lives. People who are actually guilty of animal cruelty are or animal violence are like bad people, and those people are actually synonymous with people who want worker rights or who want to unionize. Um, and you see like multiple tropes being played out at the same time. And of course, no one was thinking about this in 1941, and none of this is to take away from the fact that Walt Disney is, in fact, he is a genius. Like Walt Disney did some amazing, remarkable things, but no one has a one-dimensional legacy. Walt Disney can be an animation genius and a horrifically bad when it comes to, oh, I don't know, anti-Semitism, anti-Black racism, and and being against worker rights all at the same time. These are definitely things that can absolutely happen. So, people have complicated legacies. This is a real thing. This is another aspect that, and we're not free of these things today. Moving on, though, there was another obvious problem with Dumbo. One of the things that people identify as really troubling about the original Dumbo film is the scene with the pink elephants. Now, if you have not seen Dumbo, or you don't know what I'm talking about when I mention the pink elephants, the clowns, once again, it's always coming back to the clowns, actually had dumped a bottle of champagne into the drinking water of Dumbo. And Dumbo and his sidekick, Timothy Q. Mouse, had actually drunk the water and become intoxicated. Why is this a problem? Because Dumbo's literally a baby. He is a baby, so he's an underage child getting intoxicated off of alcohol. and as is Timothy Q. Mouse. Also, that's a freaking terrifying scene. If you actually look back at it today, like the scene with the pink elephants is something that's probably going to traumatize you as a kid, because it certainly did traumatize me. I'm looking at these weird elephantine or like pachyderm monsters, like, in this like hallucination or fever dream that are emerging on the screen, and all as a result of like a child drinking alcohol. This is weird. It passed muster in 1941, but it doesn't always pass muster today. When it's reformatted for publication, often the pink elephant scene is replaced with Dumbo dreaming of flying. So like they've kind of retrofitted that scene into the story, and and sort of rewrote history. I would never have done that. I think that if this was a piece of artwork that existed at that time, I would absolutely want to watch it in in with its original intention, the way that it was originally created. Because that was an artistic and stylistic and storytelling decision that was definitely made at that time. And so yeah, I think that and we'll get into why that scene is important a little bit later on. But most importantly, and I shouldn't say most importantly, but probably most memorable for a lot of people, especially if you're a Black person in the United States, is the scene that includes the crows. The crows are a quintessential part of the Dumbo story. Um, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, there is a cadre of four crows who actually had met with Dumbo and Timothy Q Mouse, and they cheer him on when they're talking after Dumbo and Timothy Mouse had become intoxicated. They woke up the next day with a hangover and realized that they were in a tree, and they were in the crow's tree. And so there's this chorus of four crows who and their leader is named Jim Crow, very exaggerated, very obvious Black characteristics. And so what's very interesting about this is what you're seeing here is the encoding of Blackness into specific animals, because of their style of speech, the songs that they were singing that were very jazzy, and they've got scat rhythms that are included. The naming of the lead crow as Jim Crow, and knowing what we do about Jim Crow laws in the United States makes it and an extraordinarily racist thing to be to be seen on the screen, and to be and to be consumed by young audiences. But the idea of encoding Blackness into certain characters as anthropomorphic animals themselves, is something that we didn't see very often at that time. And actually transforming, Disney is guilty of doing transformation on Black characters all the time. Even 30 years later or 40 years later, you see the Prince of Tiana is not acting as a Black woman. Tiana, the princess, actually appears on screen for a grand total of maybe 20-25 minutes as a Black woman. The rest of the time, she's an actual frog. This is something that Disney has done over and over again. And this is one of the early examples of that. So, one of the great ironies of the Crows is that they are voiced by the Hall Johnson Choir, a popular spiritual group that appeared in a bunch of Disney flicks. And the great irony of it is that this is probably their best exposure to date, actually appearing in Dumbo as these animated crows who are portraying exaggerated racial stereotypes of Black people. And also there's the aspect of the magical Negro. If anyone knows about that as a media trope, it is Black characters who are sort of sidekicks to the main characters, who don't actually have a storyline of their own, but there's a lot of shucking and jiving going on that supports the main character in their journey without actually furthering the journey themselves. You see this in loads of films that don't have anything to do with Disney at all, but Disney actually reinforced that stereotype here. Furthering the conversation about racial stereotypes, another troubling aspect of racism that is featured in this Disney film is the song of the Roustabouts. If you don't know the song of the Roustabouts, or if you don't know what I'm talking about, boy, is this a time when I wish that you would be able to see the visuals on my screen. The Roustabouts are actually Black characters in this Disney film who don't even have faces. And don't do anything other than work at night. They're working under the cover of darkness. The animation of these characters is sort of spooky. It is it's menacing. It is it's dark. It is it's not welcoming. The song of the Roustabouts wasn't like a hi ho like ode to the satisfaction of putting in a hard day's work. It's a weird and twisted bit of propaganda that casts black laborers as contented labor. Like two things to note when you're looking at them, like the first thing, like they're the only black people in the film. They're working hard in shadow and cold rain. And it's like, juxtaposed next to the white characters who get to speak or attend the circus or do any of the normal things, like, I don't know, have faces. Like, they do, like, have a less than welcoming air about them. But the song lyrics themselves about their, like, about during their appearance on the screen are equally, if not more disturbing. And I'm just going to, like, read them to you right now. Hike, ugh, hike, ugh, hike, ugh, hike. We work all day, we work all night, we never learn to read or write. We're happy-hearted roustabouts. Hike, ugh, hike, ugh, hike, ugh, hike. When other folks have gone to bed, we slave until we're almost dead. We're happy-hearted roustabouts. Hike, ugh, hike, ugh, hike, ugh, hike. We don't know when we get our pay, and when we do, we throw our pay away. When we get our pay, we throw our money all away. That's their song. Like, that's the first three verses of their song. It's like, it's not pretty. Like, it just, like, it gets worse from there. Um, but like, you're seeing this sort of confluence between, like, animal exploitation and human exploitation as well that's being played out on screen, all for the, like, entertainment of, like, a distinctly, like, white middle class audience. The white and middle class audience of the circus, like, that's being portrayed on screen, but the white and middle class audience of the theater goer who is having this experience in 1941, watching it for the first time. And so, like, like, once again, like, you can't escape the ways that, like, racism and speciesism coincide with one another. And like, again, this is a type of propaganda because it's being subconsciously, like created, and distributed for our edification, like, in, like, a nation that is, like, that's racial and, like, and species understanding is really, like, I don't know, to say the least, problematic. Like, for me, the most standout scene, and I really wish that I could, like, that I could play the song for you now. But the standout scene in, like, Dumbo was actually the song "Baby Mine." Um, Even now, when I was rewatching this in the weeks leading up to, like, doing this presentation, it stirs something that is, like, really, it stirs something in your core. I don't know how to describe it. Again, if you haven't seen the film Dumbo, then, like, this scene, if you watch it in isolation, is still going to have a tremendous effect on you. But, like, watching the whole film and, like, and watching what I think is, like, the climax of storytelling in this scene, is a deeply emotional experience. As a mother, is her trunk. You know, testing the sound. Hello, hello. Can you all hear me? Okay, I think that we're back. We lost audio for a moment. All right, our audio is back. I apologize for that. Um, so, like, now that we're back, and thank you for, like, for bearing with me. This is what happens when you're going live, but, like, we're all here. It's cool. Um, but yeah, like, if you don't like as I was saying before, like we lost audio for a moment, is that what with this, like, what happens in the scene is, like, Dumbo was being mistreated by the circus, and like his mother actually had gone on what the, like, what the circus people were saying was a rampage. And so they shackled her up in a, like, in her own jail cell, and she couldn't actually reach her child. And Dumbo goes to visit her, and she can't reach him, but the one thing that she can do is stick her tusk out the door or out the window of, like, her private cell, as a wild elephant, as a violent animal. And, like, and the song is playing, Baby Mine, while she is rocking him to sleep. And that connected me on a visceral level as a child. To the point when I was watching Dumbo, like, I don't remember how many thousands of years ago when I was a kid, and it had been, like, re-released in theaters, and I was watching it with my mom. I bawled. Like, I was the kid that had to be taken out of the theater. Cue all of the, like, all of the, like, pre-vegan, like, moments that, like, you would say, yeah, that kid is probably going to grow up and not eat animals. That was definitely one of my moments, and it probably connects with a lot of other people as well. And this is what Disney does when Disney is at its best. Disney has these amazing, remarkable moments of poignancy where, like, in almost every film, whether you love the film or you hate the film or you are just kind of, like, middle of the road on the film, every film has this pivotal moment, where, like, there is a decisive moment where, like, relationships take center stage in, like, in a way that solidifies the importance and, like, the extraordinariness of, like, of animals, as persons, as real living persons who have these, like, who have complex emotions just like we do, who have, like, all of these experiences that are not dissimilar from our own. um, and one of the great tragedies of Dumbo is that, like, this probably didn't happen in real life, and the reason why I say it didn't happen in real life is because Dumbo, most people, like, most scholars actually believe is based on a real story. In case you're unaware, or in case you forgot, like, Dumbo's real name is actually Jumbo Jr. And he is named for, like, an actual African elephant who came to London, to be at the London Zoo in 1865. And the tragedy of his story, as told by, like, a BBC documentary, with David Attenborough, called Attenborough and the Elephant, is that, like, he likely witnessed his mother being killed for her tusks and her hide before he was shipped to England. So the reality is that, like, the real Dumbo, or the real Jumbo Jr., as he was so named, is that, like, this scene never would have happened because, like, the reality is that his mother would have been killed in front of him. And then he was stolen from the wild to actually be moved to a zoo, which is basically a penitentiary for animals. At the zoo, he was actually a famous attraction, and he gave rise to children. Even Queen Victoria's children participated all day long. At night, he began having violent outbursts that were so bad he broke off his own tusks, and continually ground them down. Um, at the time, it was thought that this was due to a hormonal state, but, like, elephant experts on the Attenborough show, they theorized that he could have been suffering from extreme pain in his teeth from what? Malnutrition. How could he be malnourished? Because he was taken out of his natural habitat and he wasn't fed a very natural diet. Studying his bones, which are actually on storage at the, American Museum of Natural History in New York, experts found evidence of extreme stress on his knees, probably from giving rides to all of those children when he was at the zoo, before he was given away to the circus. And the tragedy is that, like, he actually died at the tender age of 24 because when he was given away to the circus, he only lived another, I believe, 3 years before he was hit by an oncoming freight train, and suffered, like, a lot of internal bleeding as a result of his injuries. Um, so yeah, like, his confinement and his isolation from other elephants, also may have caused his awful moods. But his lifelong handler, Matthew Scott, wrote that he would calm Jumbo down with alcohol, which is possibly the inspiration, like I said, we would get to this earlier, for him actually being, actually experiencing the hallucinations during the scene with the pink elephants when he inadvertently had become intoxicated. So the real story of like Jumbo is not a happy story at all, and this is possibly the like biggest lesson that we can take away from this here. Like, Disney has a like long and storied history of taking of taking tragic tales and putting a big shiny bow on them, so to speak. And there's a real danger in that. Like, we get to have these wonderful, fantastic stories, but these stories, they divorce us from the realities that, that are happening to us every day. And there are so many statements that could be made about, about pop culture and media theory, about like how this divorces us from, from the realities of the working class. Culture is fed to us by the upper class in such a way that that it creates these fairy tales that distract us from the day-to-day of living in a capitalist society. Is this true? To a certain degree you have to agree with that. When you think about the the social theorists and economic theorists who existed before us, like Karl Marx, or like um like Gramsci, or any of the others. This is a reality. That can't be ignored. Are they magical stories nonetheless? Yes, they are. So when you ask the question, would I show this to my kids, or would I show this to other children? Even as a vegan, I would definitely say yes. I would definitely err on the side of showing this to children in their full context, in the fullness of of what our history is, because I don't think that our history is something to run away from. We can appreciate what a story is, and and how it was told and why it was told in that way during that time. And we can also talk about the horrible history that had preceded it, and why these stories were told the way that they were. So when we're wrapping up, I do we are just about out of time. We've got 5 more minutes. I do have some resources for you. Just if you wanted to talk about these things or read more about it. One of the references that I've got here is the book The American Animated Cartoon, a critical anthology. It is from 1980. There was an essay written by Michael Wilmington in there that I actually used for this. The Disney version, which is from Simon and Schuster, 1968. Richard Schickel, Schickel. I'm actually in Central Europe right now, in case anyone is wondering, and it is going on 7 o'clock at night, and fireworks are going off, which is really disconcerting. My dog is not he doesn't really care about fireworks, but holy smokes, that was just distracting to me just now, because yeah, the city that I'm living in actually had banned fireworks and fireworks celebrations. But I guess you can't ban private fireworks, because people are going to find a way to be jerks nonetheless. And I was so happy that companion animals and free living animals would not have to experience that this year. But in case you couldn't hear that in the background, that's happening right now. Um, John Grant, Encyclopedia of Walt Disney's Animated Characters. This was Harper and Row, 1987. And a motive view of communication from the Quarterly Journal of Speech, Walter Fisher. There's so much literature that I wanted to include, and so many scenes that I wanted to analyze one-on-one, but we just didn't have time to do it today. Thank you all for joining me. Thank you all again if you actually had made a contribution. If those of you, for those of you who contributed to this through my Patreon, we had actually 100, I believe $150 dollars in unique donations this month. And so that will be matched at least in part by Miyoko's Creamery. Thank you all for participating. Thank you for supporting the sanctuary. Thank you for supporting my work, and thank you for being here. I hope you all stick around for the rest of the presentations and the rest of the things that are going to be going on today. Uplands PEAK is going to be doing this all day long. And and it's just for a good cause. Sanctuaries are really, really important. If you are an animal activist, or you care at all about animals, these are persons who are refugees from an exploitative system, that literally wants to commodify their dead bodies, so that they can be consumed. Animal exploitation and capitalism, it is abhorrent. And so yeah, working together to to rescue animals who are, again, escaping the system or who are refugees of this system of exploitation is like some of the greatest work that, like, the people have committed themselves to. So like me being able to participate in this in however small way that I can, and to, like, have a little fun with you all today, having a presentation on media theory and talking about, like, childhood classics. This is something that, like, that I really appreciate you all joining me for. So with that said, I am going to sign out now. Peace to everyone. Thank you to Uplands PEAK for having me. Have a great, safe, and happy new year. Wear your masks. Love you all very much.